Hello, welcome to this edition of Biz Talk. I'm Zheng Feng in Beijing. With the global development beset by challenges and world economy on a downward trajectory, world leaders gather in Southeast Asia for the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia, and APEC in Bangkok, Thailand. With two major events, the world will strengthen solidarity and cooperation, coordinate macroeconomic policies, and work concertedly for strong, sustainable, inclusive, and balanced growth of the world economy. To discuss more about this, we are joined by four distinguished guests. Nelson Wong, Vice Chairman and Executive Director of Shanghai Center for RimPac Strategic and International Studies. He joins us from Abu Dhabi. Hello, Nelson.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome. We also have Professor Bert Hofman, Director of East Asian Institute of National University of Singapore and Professor in Practice at the Lee Kuan Yew School. And Professor Hofman used to be working with the World Bank. Welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
Great. We also have from Bangkok, Dr. Phaichit. He's Vice Chairman and Secretary General of Thai Chamber of Commerce in China. He joins us from Bangkok and he'll be attending the APEC 2022. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
And we also have Juan Pablo. He's the president of the Uruguayan Association of Exporters. He joins us from Shanghai. Hello.
Thanks for having me here.
Well, gentlemen, the 2022 G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia, and APEC in Bangkok, Thailand brought together the major economies leaders in a physical meeting to the first time since the pandemic began 3 years ago. It offers an opportunity to hold bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the group meetings. How important are such two gatherings for global governance and the global economy? Starting from you, Professor Hofman.
Well, I'll speak first on the G20, which I think is a very important meeting. It's a diplomatic masterpiece of Professor Joko Widodo to get everybody around the table, including Russia and invited guests such as Ukraine. I think it's a very important meeting. It's a critical time in the world economy, as you said, and there's a lot of big issues. There's currently, in the context of worldwide inflation, there is now an adjustment of monetary policies, which drives up interest rates, which gives a lot of fallout for developing countries that need to borrow, and therefore the borrowing cost goes up. There's, of course, still the disruptions of COVID-19. There is the disruptions of the war in Ukraine. So there's a lot of things to talk about. And getting the group together again after more than 3 years is I think, very important. The bilaterals are important. We had a wonderful bilateral between President Biden and President Xi. And I think that was very good to stabilize the relationship. But more broadly, the economic issues at hand are important. And I think the agenda is very substantive from Indonesia. So I hope that we're going to see a reasonably good outcome and a way forward.
Yeah. And now to Nelson. Nelson, you were attending some very important forums in Abu Dhabi and also in Europe. I guess those guests and strategists from Europe and from the Middle East are also paying attention to G20 and APEC?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm currently in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, attending the 9th Abu Dhabi Strategic Debate, which has gathered together so many strategists and international relation experts from all parts of the world. And what I can share with you, gentlemen, everyone, is that the word China, the name of our country, China, has been repeatedly mentioned in almost every session during the conference. And I was telling everybody, I said, look, I'm the only Chinese sitting here in this hall talking to everyone, which I hope will bring a lot of positive energy despite the pandemic that is still going on, and the quarantine is still not 100% lifted in China. I'm here talking to everyone to get rid of all unnecessary misunderstandings ourselves. And because the world, as our anchor has correctly pointed out, the world is in a very difficult time, and we are sailing into uncharted waters. But with the G20 summit and the upcoming APEC meeting happening right now, right in front of ours, I think the whole world is getting very excited because our leaders are finally meeting with each other physically instead of online, which is different, actually. So as our President Xi Jinping has pointed out during his meeting with President Biden, he said that face-to-face meeting can never be replaced by anything else. And it is so important, and that the world is so big that it can host the mutual survival and development of our two countries, which is so important to the revival, the recovery of world economy, which is at the moment at its stake.
Right. Thank you. And Dr. Phaichit, the Bangkok city must be very excited holding the APEC meeting. You're in Bangkok. Tell us the expectation. Tell us how excited the city, how important is the APEC meeting to Bangkok?
Yes, I think all aspects here in Thailand has been, I would say, revamped and be ready to welcome all the participative from everyone, everywhere. To add on to what Dr. Hofman and Nelson just mentioned, I think the very first issues, in terms of the theme of G20, which is what common recovery and strong recovery, I think it reflects the whole world aspiration, that we need to maybe recover from what we have lost. Secondly, I think I do agree that I understand that this is the very first time in several years that the G20 leaders right now, will this time, will meet, in person. Okay, and I also understand this is the very first time for President Xi Jinping, after the 20th National Congress, to attend the multinational corporation. So the whole world, I think, is watching the G20 at this point of time. I personally do believe that the G20 and of course the APEC will be a very stepping stone, for the world at this time, at this point of time, to recover, from what we have lost in the past few years.
Great. Right. And to Juan Pablo, Mr. You've been staying for Shanghai, in China for some 20 years, but you're here representing the exporters' interest of Uruguay. Uruguay is part of the APEC economic circle. Tell us what is your understanding of the importance of G20 and APEC?
Yes, I think I agree with everything it has been said until now. Also, from my perspective, this G20 is probably the most important ever. It started well, and I'm very positive on this meeting. I'm sure in 10 years from now, we'll probably look back at this G20 as a milestone for the humanity prosperity. At the end of the day, we all know 85% of the world's economy output is represented by these 20 countries, 75% of the world trade. So it is extremely important in this period of great instability, both economical and geopolitical. And it has been said about the bilateral meetings on a side. It started, in my opinion, very, very well yesterday. Let's hope that then the teams of the big leaders of President Mr. Xi and President Biden will then follow up on the alignments between the two countries and really have the intention of improve in a constructive way putting on aside the prejudices and really looking at an improvement on the overall world situation with certain positivity. I'm very confident about it.
Right. Mr. Juan Pablo, since you have mentioned the economic issues, let me ask you further a bit in the economic recovery. It's one of the themes of G20 this year. As the president of Uruguay, a chamber of exporters to China, what's your feeling about the recovery of exports of trade between China and Uruguay, or even larger, Uruguay with the whole world?
I'm confident about this improvement on the trading. Nowadays, we are facing a lot of disruptions. We have this supply chain disruptions. We have very big raising costs from all point of views, energy raising costs, containers raising costs, lack of containers sometimes, delays. So the situation for trading overall is not easy and is very expensive from both sides. Uruguay is a small country, but overall these difficulties are still big and very much dependent on the overall also geopolitical situation. In my opinion, this lack of stability is still a major issue that impacts the whole thing.
And Dr. Phaichit, you just mentioned recovery, economic recovery. As far as I know, Thailand has a very important economy of tourism. Your tourism has already recovered to the pre-pandemic level, although Chinese tourists have not recovered yet. What's your assessment of the recovery of the Thai economy, and how would the focus of G20 and APEC on the economic recovery, this theme, going to influence the world economy?
At this point of time, normally I would say before the pandemic, we used to have 40 million, foreign tourists visiting Thailand a year. But at this point of time, I think at the end of the year, we would expect about 10 million. So basically, so far we have received about 25% of the overall foreign tourists coming in to Thailand. But of course, during this period of time, especially during the APEC, we have drawn a lot of foreign tourists visiting Thailand. Now we go to the department store, tourism attraction places. We all have seen, quite a number of foreign tourists, as you mentioned, except, Chinese. The number of Chinese tourists at this point of time is still limited. But I do believe that by the end of the year or early of next year, we'll get a chance to welcome Chinese tourists visiting Thailand. And I would say in the second half of next year, things will get back to normal in terms of tourism industries.
Well, I certainly hope so, personally. I've personally been to Thailand for tourism a couple of times. I really love my trips. Hope I could be back sometime very soon, hopefully, as you said earlier, next year. And to you, Professor Bert Hofman, you're in Singapore. You used to be with the World Bank. Let me ask you your assessment of China's role in the G20 and APEC. What kind of role does China play in these two framework of cooperation?
China plays a very important role in both. And if you recall, the G20 is really a child of crises. There was the Asian financial crisis, and then the finance ministers and the governors of central banks started to meet at the end of the 90s. And then there was the global financial crisis. That was the first summit in 2008 in Washington, D.C. And there it's international financial stability, a redesign of the international monetary system, and better coordination, better macroeconomic coordination among major players in the world economy. Those issues are still there. And of course, China was one of the chairs. When I was the country director for the World Bank in China in 2015, China, of course, hosted the G20, and it was a very successful G20. One has to say, though, that at the current stage, the G20, because of the geopolitical tensions, may be a bit less of an effective body than it used to be. But nevertheless, it remains very important. And China is really quite central. The agenda that China has put forward over the years remains very relevant. And of course, China is now the second largest economy in the world. A lot of people looking at China. China will also be an important factor in the recovery of the world economy. The prospects of the IMF are not that positive, including for China, but for the world economy, 2.8% growth projected for next year is really very low. And some would say that's already a global recession. So China's growth and China's recovery is very important in this whole global picture as well.
Thank you for your inputs. And Nelson, to you, let's look at some detailed themes of these events. The G20 events theme set by Indonesia, let me quote, global health architecture. I guess it's related to the pandemic and other health issues. Sustainable energy transition. Of course, the world is undergoing some energy disruptions or energy crisis, we can even say, and digital transformation. Everyone wants a digital transformation. How relevant are these issues to the world, Nelson?
Well, the setting of the agenda this time for the G20 represents basically all the major challenges our world is facing at the moment. Disruption of supply chain of global food and energy supply chain is quite apparent, actually, due to mainly the war in Ukraine and also the mistrust among the major players around the world. And also the digital transformation is, of course, a matter of, course for our world economy. And but what I would like to point out is that, yes, the whole world is looking at 2023 as being a year of not that bright. Actually, a lot of people are predicting a global recession for 2023. However, I think this is what this G20 meeting is going to be very important, because let's look at this, as Dr. Hofman has just pointed out, the projection of 2.8 growth is not high. It's not high, and this is exactly why China's recovery is going to be so important. It's going to be so important, not only because China is the second largest economy in the world, but also let us do not forget that China is the major and biggest trading partner of over 100 countries. So that's why the economy of China is very much interwoven with the rest of the world. So this is why I believe, this G20 summit is going to be so important. And then APEC, why APEC is so important? The entire Asia-Pacific region has not only become China's biggest trading partner in terms of trade volumes, but also it provides the driving force and confidence for a global economic recovery. So this is why this meeting, these two summits are so important and has attracted the attention of people around the world.
And Juan, do you want to add your point on this? What's your understanding of the themes of G20? Do you have any other issues that you think bear no less significance?
I fully agree with what have been said, because these topics are so important that now are not just top of mind of the government, the political leaders, the think tanks. This is really relevant to the society, the common people. Look at the COVID, for example. Everybody is demanding focus on healthcare investment, on health-related infrastructure, the vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. And the sustainable energy transition is somehow related because it's for the good of the planet, right? as well as digitalization, will improve efficiencies, will improve productivity, will improve people's lives. But all these things without geopolitical stability, without peace, all those efforts risk to be vanished. So I would still put geopolitical stability and peace as priority number one.
Stability and peace also important.
Yes.
What about you,
yes, very
Dr.
much.
Phaichit?
In fact, I do agree with many points that we have discussed. I think that better than the expected decline of the inflation in the US,
yep.
and several aspects, let's say the significant control on the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, I think pretty much control are also very positive sign. However, I begin to worry about the recent wave of layoff in, say, the US. I also kind of worried, many industries, like even technological industry, financial industry, in the US, they start laying off people, even though the inflation rate, the drop, better than expect, but it's also give me a worry on another side. And also we are approaching the Christmas season, right? The shopping season.
Yeah.
And this could also maybe increase the inflation, back again, to our life. So I'm kind of worried, but I do hope that this will not happen. That the inflation rate in the US, will be back again and then higher than expect in the last quarter. And of course, this will take, the world, longer time to recover, but of course, I also agree that G20 and the APEC summit meeting, these two will be the key and very significant, platform, for the world, in order to recover for next year.
So, Dr. Phaichit, seems you're a bit cautiously optimistic about the world economic situation for next year because the US remains a big uncertainty, right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. But let me continue to ask you on this. Thailand announces the theme for APEC 2022, Open, Connect, and Balance. I think what you mentioned now, the inflation curbing in the US and also the job market complications, big laying offs from Meta, over 11,000 jobs, and also Twitter from Elon Musk. It's all about balance. This Open, Connect, and Balance theme of APEC 2022, officially it means open to all opportunities, connected in all dimensions, and balanced in all aspects. The priority is to facilitate open trade investment and to advance regional economic integration, including the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific or FTAAP. Mr. Phaichit, what's your understanding of the theme?
What you say is right. I think the theme that we proposed this year, for the APEC, is to open up, all the things, in terms of business opportunities, and of course we want to move forward, in detail. We probably have heard about the BCG, Biocircular Green Industries, that I think what the world is moving toward for. We all agree that, after 30 years of development here in Thailand, we put, a lot of investment on the heavy industries that, on another hand, also, of course, destroy our environments. But, for the next 30 years, we also do hope that with the BCG, the strategies, we will move environments, as the core of the development, and of course, develop our economy sustainably. Okay, So we also would like, of course, to learn from China, as China has, I think, learned, experienced this kind of issues, for several years after being the factory of the world. So the green economies, digital economies, and several things, even common prosperities, are also the things that not only Thailand but also I think the APEC members can learn from China. So with the very proactive role of China, I think APEC, can be more successful and bring many things into realities, quickly.
Right. And Professor Hofman, you're from NUS, and Singapore is part of APEC. How do you understand the APEC 2022 theme, Open, Connect, and Balance?
These themes are very, very important. But I have to say that and it's great that APEC meets again. Again, it's wonderful if leaders meet and have time and space to exchange points of view. I have to say that right now APEC is in a bit of a difficult bind, and the competition is fierce because remember APEC started in 1989. It was really to sort of connect across the Pacific, but the United States seems to have lost a little bit of an interest in using APEC as a vehicle for further integration. As a fact, integration, trade, full stop. So Asia has been moving ahead, and you mentioned RCEP already. Of course, the CPTPP is an interesting one, the now Japan-led organization, because that is actually across the Pacific, where also Peru and Chile are members. So they are APEC members, and they're also CPTPP members. That seems to be a good vehicle to sort of move ahead. Notwithstanding APEC, it's always good to continue to exchange and maybe to focus on more narrow issues in which one can still agree, even though broader agreements are at this point in time within APEC not possible.
Right. Since we are talking a lot about APEC in this region, Southeast Asia has been hosting a number of global meetings lately. It also leads the world in economic recovery this year, very upbeat. And this region has been very young. The total population has been quite young, developed, focused, lots of developing countries focusing a lot on development instead of other agenda, a political agenda or other agenda, and also connected. We've seen the ASEAN has been trying to work together for many years. The whole region, 700 million people, is China's largest trading partner, surpassing North America and the European Union for quite a few years now. So what's the significance of China-ASEAN economic tie, and what implications does this tie has for other international relations? Let's start from you, Dr. Phaichit.
Oh, of course. I think I always say that recently the ASEAN has been like a beautiful lady, who are watched and flirted by many people. In terms of geographical or logistic, location that we have, the advantage that we have is also one thing. You mentioned about the 700 million, people with a very high speed rate of I would say growing middle income, in the region, and also of course if you look at this region, it will be the best region that stay between, of course, the two populous countries like China and India. So if ASEAN can link those two countries together, Asia, or Asian region will be even stronger, in the future. Of course, in terms of trade, ASEAN has been built, in terms of FTA and expanded like FTA ASEAN +3 plus India, Australia, New Zealand, and to other regions as well. And as we all know that just last year, they have also developed, into RCEP, the Regional Economic Partnership Corporation. This kind of development, fast development, of course, will bring, the trade, as the key mechanism in order to push the region forward in terms of economic development. And of course, the ASEAN in itself, at this point of time, they also develop into the economic community or common market, where we can move, all the factor of endowments in terms of like labor, technologies, or even financial factors, all around the region, more freely. So these kind of factors also will attract, investment into the region. With the tech war or trade war that's happening, and doesn't see the sign of reducing or stopping very soon. I think ASEAN will be also the key answer or platform for many countries, to invest, to do things, and probably use this as the areas to export, to other countries all over the world as well.
Right. And Professor Hofman, Singapore is a key part of ASEAN countries and one of the most advanced economies in ASEAN. Can you share with us your understanding of the growing importance of ASEAN's economy and its tie with China and the world?
So for Singapore, ASEAN, of course, is of paramount importance. And frankly, Singapore is very pleased with the developments in ASEAN, but also the increasing interest in ASEAN from other countries, and whether that is for just economic reasons, but in part also a little bit geopolitical reasons. But don't forget that ASEAN actually started as on two legs, and they still have two legs. One is the economic leg, but the other is the security leg. Yep. So ASEAN was also a security solution, and that continued along the line. So in that sense, there's both a security leg as well as an economic leg. Economically, for China, as you mentioned, it's now the largest trading partner, which is absolutely phenomenal. It is also a very big investment destination for China, and the other way around. ASEAN is also a big investor in China. Singapore is a very big investor in China, in part because it's financial center. So a lot of the money comes through Singapore before it goes to China, or in the other way around, a lot of money goes from China to Singapore before it goes to other parts of ASEAN. But those ties are strengthening. The breakthrough was really already in 2001 when the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement was signed. And that was really, China just entered the WTO. That free trade agreement was a major boost for trade. And now, as you say, in both ways, it is the largest trading partner and increasingly a very large investment partner. The foreign direct investment of China in Vietnam in manufacturing is being very important now, not least because of some of the trade tensions that were between the U.S. and China. It's better to export from Vietnam rather than from China mainland in some areas. But I think irrespective, that integration will continue. China's investment in infrastructure in the region, from the railways through Laos, the railways in Indonesia, the ports in Indonesia, airports, are all very positive for further integration. So, and then combine it with RCEP, I see a really bright future for the region, for ASEAN-China relationships.
Right. Gentlemen, after talking so much about ASEAN and Asia, let's look at the global picture. After multiple rounds of interest rate hikes, U.S. inflation has eased to a better than expected 7.7% for October. We hear this a few days back. And this is good news. It's better than expected. So now the world's financial markets have already reacted to that, surging quite a lot. Can the business world raise their hope for more recovery now? Or, as Dr. Phaichit warned us earlier, things may get worse before they get better? What's your opinion? Nelson, to you.
Well, I very much appreciate what has been said by Dr. Hofman and our friend in Thailand, and also, of course, our friend from Uruguay. I think let us do not forget that change is the only thing that never gets changed. So when people are trying to, cling to what they have, let us be tolerant about all the changes that are happening around us, be it an economic downturn, be it inflation. Let's have confidence in ourselves as human beings. We have resilience. We have our own talent and a wisdom. So I pretty much like what the presidents of China and the US had. Both sides have expressed a willingness to work together to prevent the competition from going into confrontation. And this has sent out a very positive sign to the rest of the world, because when you have the two biggest economies in the world willing to sit down and talk to manage their differences, this is good news. This is good news. And in terms of the outlook into the future, I think confidence is very important in every country. And with China and the US and the European Union, let's do not forget the European Union, because the EU is the number 3 biggest economic force after the US and China. So the world will have to work together to get rid of all the differences that we might have, and use the talent, use the wisdom of our ancestors and of us today to find our way forward. Because we have to move forward to work together to seek peaceful coexistence, despite of our geopolitical concerns or security concerns. Let us have confidence in ourselves first. With all these new establishments coming up, RCEP, what Dr. Hofman has mentioned, the other economic cooperation mechanisms. And in terms of security, let's do not forget the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS as well, that has also attracted a lot more countries willing to participate. So I'm still quite optimistic towards the future. And the basis of my optimism is in the confidence that we have.
Great. So Nelson talked a lot. He brought a lot of concepts and cooperation mechanisms into the prediction, into the outlook of the world economy. Is basically saying that when there's a will, there's a way. What about you, Mr. Juan Pablo? You're in the business circle, overseeing the trade between China and Uruguay. What's your outlook for the world economy?
It has been mentioned that the European Union, and I agree that is also very important because, yes, it has been a good signal, the better than expected 7.7% inflation in October in the US. But of course, influenced by, the interest rate raised so much, and these are expected even to reach 6 points. This is a record in more than 20 years. In Europe, still the situation is a bit different, with so many countries at 10% inflation, with the big energy costs still increasing, with the winter coming and the cost of the gas and energy in general. So I'm afraid we still need to wait a little bit before the recovery. But I like very much what has been said right now about the confidence, about being positive, because it depends on each of us, on each country, and this is fundamental. Unfortunately, we are living in days in which probably need to wait a little bit. But as has been said right now, I'm also very confident on the midterm. Hopefully, in 2023, situation will improve.
2023. What about you, Professor Hofman? Singapore has a very much sensitive economy in the global economy because it's so much involved in the global service system, and financial system is a financial hub for Asia and the world. It's also very export oriented. What's your sense of the world economic outlook?
Well, Singapore is definitely the canary in the coal mine, as they say. And look, in terms of trade, we've actually seen a weakening in the past several months, and that in part actually affects also the Chinese economy quite a bit. And it's anticipating the cooling down of the economy. JP mentioned that it's hard to get containers. Well, unfortunately, it's going to be easier and easier to get containers, in part because global trade is slowing down. And I think that will last until next year. You mentioned, Lucian, you mentioned the interest rate. Yes, there is now an expectation that the path will be less steep. That's not yet that we will be on a downward track. So we now expect, or the market expect, I should say, that in the December, the Federal Reserve will increase one more time. The Europeans will probably follow that. And the effects of that will work themselves into 2023. So 2023 is not going to be a great year. The fallout of that, of some of the interest rate, of course, on the domestic economies, US and Europe, but then the risk that it poses for other countries, including those that are relatively highly indebted, that's something of concern. And that constitutes a downward risk for the economy. If those countries get into trouble, then there might be if you want, a further knock-on of that interest rate. The banks might be affected. There might be financial tensions, and it becomes harder. Capital flows become harder, and therefore investment levels in developing countries will be suppressed. So that's not a great picture, but I think that is the outlook that we're looking at. So it is actually very important. On the upside, it is very important that the central banks from around the world maintain their credibility. And that seems to be holding quite well. If you look at the surveys, people actually believe that the Fed is doing the right thing and that inflation will come down over time. Same with the European Union. They actually look, the European Central Bank has a more complex environment, but nevertheless, the credibility of the institutions does not seem to be affected. That's very important, because then as soon as it will start coming down, interest rates can come down as well.
Okay. Now, gentlemen, I want to ask you an important question. After a few years of rising unilateralism, multilateralism seems to have taken back some lost ground. Do you agree with such opinion? What's your observation from you, Dr. Phaichit?
Yes, I do agree that in the past decade, I think the unilateral has been on the rise, and even the protectionism is also coming back to the pictures. But it doesn't mean that I believe that the world should move forward that way. I still believe in the win-win collaboration on the multilateralism. Okay, I do believe that, you know, with the free flow of the trade and services, I mean product and services, this will bring, you know, the economic development, you know, back to the world, or even the more effective utilization of the resources, you know. So on this, I think the constructive meeting, you know, between the US and China, the leaders, I think also give a very good kickstart, not only to G20 and APEC summit, okay, but also I think to the world. I think it sent a very good positive signal to the world that this is maybe the end of this year will be the end of all the trouble that we have. You know, it hit the floor and then we survived. Now we're gonna go back, you know, to the pre-pandemic level. So this kind of thing also reflect that, you know, to me politically, this is the very first time to me that the US sent a very good signal on the coexisting, you know, of the US and China in the major economic and even political platform. So with these kind of things, I think it will give the world, a better option, for next year. So with all this, I think I also do hope that, the unilateralism will be slowed down, will be reduced, and we'll go back to more of the regionalism and multilateralism, so that we can grow stronger in the future, from next year on.
Right. And Mr. Juan Pablo, you are the president of Uruguayan Chambers Association for Exporters, so I presume that you do not like protectionism because it's against global trade. And the G20 summit and APEC is to promote multilateralism. So how does it help the business of multinational companies and also small companies that may exist in Uruguay and export their products to the world?
Very much. Actually, the relevance is enormous because we cannot split the companies, multinationals. We do not have in Uruguay a lot of multinationals, but some yes. But small, middle enterprises cannot be separated by the impact of the policies and the situation of the overall general economy framework. So certainly the outcome of the G20, the fact that hopefully there will be put on a side the divergences that still will be there, but focus on the recovery, on solving the major issues of the economy and the plan that will certainly be extremely important to all different sides of companies to recover their production, their profitability, their jobs creation, and then their trading, and then as well the consumer confidence that at the end of the day is fundamental for a healthy development of the producers and the suppliers.
Right. And gentlemen, I think after the Paris Accord and also the Glasgow agreements on carbon reduction, major economies have promised to cut reduction. Ever since then, carbon reduction, the environmental issue has always been one of the key themes of any global conferences and forums like G20 and Summit, no exception. So how do economies, developed economies and developing economies, balance between social welfare, economic recovery, and carbon reduction goals at such a time of global energy supply disruptions?
We understand that the global climate summit is also happening right now in Cairo, the capital of Egypt, and I think the incentive and the reasoning behind going green is very much shared around the world. But the problem we're facing at the moment is how you can, make the developed countries to agree with all the developing countries in terms of the use of energy, the use of clean energy, and to reduce emission of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas. I think there are a couple of issues. One is mutual understanding and a mutual consensus, and second is the use of technology, the use of modern technology for clean energy. I think there is a going campaign right now in Europe to go green, basically, to use more electric cars, more electric buses. But this is where global cooperation is going to be very important, because when it comes to alternative energy sources, China is already a world leader in terms of technology, particularly when it comes to wind power and solar. And of course, it is not limited to these two sources. There are other sources as well. So when you have geopolitical conflicts, when you have ideological disputes, it actually prevents the cooperation from happening. China and Europe can actually become natural partners to promote a cleaner environment. And so this is also a point that I've been sharing in different occasions. These days in Abu Dhabi, but last 2 weeks I was in London, in Holland, Amsterdam, The Hague, and also Brussels and Budapest. I've been telling all my colleagues and our friends, I said, we all have to work together to move forward, but misunderstanding against each other is going to be very detrimental to all of us. And as I said, one thing that you have to understand where we come from as Chinese. I said, when many of you guys have been talking about freedom and democracy, do you know what we have been brought up for? We have been brought up to understand that peace and development is of utmost importance, which means stability. We need to have a stable environment before we can talk about economic growth and a mutual cooperation. So when it comes to this unilateralism or bilateralism or multilateralism, I think these are terms. What is important is our consensus in terms of the way forward.
Yeah.
And I said, we still need to have confidence. So I would stress the 3 Ps: passion, patience, and perseverance.
Yeah. Nelson talks a lot about mentality, and Nelson also said something going tandem with what Juan Pablo said earlier about the security of the world. The peaceful development of the world is very crucial for the recovery. And Professor Hofman, let me ask you very briefly, because Nelson just mentioned that developed economies should assist developing economies in reducing carbon. What's your assessment?
No question, yes. And as a fact, that was agreed in Paris, that there would be help from developed countries to developing countries. The Paris Agreement is fantastic, but it's not enough. So the more developing countries can do and developed countries can do, the better. The problem with developing countries, it's not actually no longer technology. If you look at technology, thanks to great inventions around the world, thanks to China's scale, renewable energy is actually already cost competitive. But for developing countries, because their risk premiums are higher, finance is the problem. So developing the finance to finance the renewable energy in developing countries is going to be absolutely crucial. And some of it's happening, a lot more needs to be done.
Great, thank you for your input, Professor Hofman. Right, the G20 Bali Summit is the first multilateral summit the top Chinese leaders attend after the successful conclusion of the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. And China's attendance at this year's APEC Economic Leaders Meeting is also an important act of China's head of state diplomacy towards Asia-Pacific. This fully shows the high importance China attaches to the Asia-Pacific economic cooperation and the world at large. Now, thanks again to our guests, our 4 very distinguished guests, to Mr. Nelson Wong, Vice Chairman and Executive Director of Shanghai Center for RimPac Strategic and International Studies. Also, we thank Professor Bert Hofman, Director of East Asian Study Institute of National University of Singapore, Dr. Phaichit, Vice Chairman of Secretary General of Thai Chamber of Commerce in China, and also we thank Juan Pablo, President of Uruguayan Association of Exporters. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your input. And with that, we come to the end of this episode of Biz Talk. I'm Zhen Jufeng. Thanks for watching. See you next time.